Andy, my dude, have you heard of the magical website builder known as Squarespace?
Ugh, not another Squarespace ad. I feel like every podcast is sponsored by them.
Hey, don't knock it till you try it. Yes, okay, it is overhyped, but actually it lives up to the hype. Squarespace is like a website fairy godmother. With a click of a button, your site transforms into a beautiful masterpiece.
A website fairy godmother? That sounds interesting. What makes it so magical?
Well, for starters, those slick templates make anyone look like a professional web designer. Pick one, customize the colors and fonts to match your brand, and voila. Plus, the drag and drop fluid engine is so easy, your grandma could build a site on Squarespace.
Well, she did knit me a lovely scarf last Christmas. Maybe website design is next.
Exactly. And when you're ready to sell your Nana's handmade scarves online, Squarespace has built-in e-commerce. Add a store with one click. Get flexible payment options. Then watch those sales roll in. And when she wants to teach others her steezy scarf skills, Squarespace's new courses feature is just the ticket. Nana can set up her curriculum and enrollments and payments in a snap and become the next e-knitting influencer.
Oh, wow, you really sold me with the grandma angle. Sign me up for that free trial.
Just go to thenextreel.com/Squarespace and transform your site into a beautiful Squarespace masterpiece.
Well, thanks, Pete. Even though it's overhyped, Squarespace actually sounds perfect for Nana's site's needs. Appreciate the warning on the ads, though. I'll brace myself next time I listen to a podcast.
Anytime. Let me know if you need any help getting that site up and running. Andy, can you believe we've almost hit 700 episodes of The Next Reel?
I know, it's crazy. And with all the other episodes in our family of podcasts, we are well over 1,200 episodes of movie conversation. It's really pretty amazing that we've gotten to have these in-depth movie chats every week for over a decade now.
And we couldn't have done it without our loyal community of film fans. Their support over the years has meant so much.
For sure. That reminds me, we should give the merch store a shout out. Buying shirts from thenextreel.com/merch is a great way listeners can continue to support the show. Plus, they get to sport our great designs.
Absolutely. I think sometimes folks forget we have a variety of shirts, mugs, phone cases, and more available. In fact, a great place to start is with a shirt sporting the Next Reel's logo.
We also have that classic Fast Times Spicoli Surf School tee, or the weirdly popular Rusty's European Tour shirt.
The one from National Lampoon's European Vacation. Why is that so popular?
Search me, but we have sold a ridiculous number of those. I guess there are a lot of Rustys taking trips to Europe?
We're always adding new designs based on movies we've covered, like our brand new design for a streetcar named Desire, featuring a streetcar named Desire. So if you want to rep your love of TNR and films, head to thenextreel.com/merch.
Every purchase helps us continue to have these weekly in-depth conversations. So visit thenextreel.com/merch today.
And as always, thanks for listening and being a part of the Next Reel community. We've got lots more great movie chats coming your way. I'm Pete Wright.
And I'm Andy Nelson.
Welcome to the Next Reel. When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
Europa Europa is over. It's time to pray for candy from the sky.
This is the true story of Solomon Perel. On the eve of war in 1938, his father orders him to survive at any cost. Separated from his home and family, he embarks on an odyssey, the likes of which has never been seen on the screen before.
We're kicking off a new series tonight, Andy. This is very exciting.
Huzzah!
Huzzah!
We like new series.
Oh, yeah, we sure do. And this is the series of the films of Agnieszka Holland. How'd we end up with the good Miss Holland?
I have known about her and her films for a while, and I think stemming from this particular film that we're talking about tonight, I have found her, I haven't seen a lot of her works, but I really enjoyed this one, her version of The Secret Garden. She did a film with Leonardo DiCaprio called Total Eclipse. That was kind of an interesting film, kind of an indie film in the 90s. I seem to really bulk up on her 90s projects. And I feel like Olivier, that's one that I always feel like I think I've seen it, but I can't quite remember. So she's always been a director that stuck with me. And I think it's largely because of this film and how it stuck with me and how it resonated with me. So I found her to be a really interesting director to potentially talk about for the show. And I know I probably had been trying to throw her name into our hat for a good while, and I managed to finally get her on here because, she's an interesting filmmaker who makes interesting films and is worth talking about.
Well, and that leads us to this film. I mean, she was I think ended up connected to some incredible source material for this movie, and this is a memoir. This is a true story, Europa Europa, that based on the memoir of Solomon Perel. The book was, I was a Nazi Jungen, and he tells the story of his life pretending to be, of different ethnic backgrounds in order to make his way through the war across Europe, and it is incredibly compelling. So, how this was the second time you've seen this movie? Third time?
Yeah, the first time was no, just twice. The first time was in the theater when it came out, but it was at our campus would have like an international film series where kind of the indie international films would come through probably shortly after the main release. And I saw it there, and it has always stuck with me. And so this was the second time I had seen it, but it was a thrill to revisit it. And I really fell for that style of storytelling where it's just kind of this journey, and every step of the way is kind of a different experience, and you kind of get a sense of this person and their life and how things change because of all the different kind of experiences that they go through over the course of the story. And I had kind of forgotten a little bit of that with this particular film, and revisiting it, it's like, oh, this is why it's stuck in my head for so many years, because of this storytelling style, which I just find so compelling. I think it's really a mesmerizing film, and it's very easy to identify with this young Solomon character, or Sally, as he's often called, or Solek. I mean, there's a variety of different names he ends up going by. Because he's a young, easily identifiable character who you can just kind of ride along with in this journey, and it's easy to see why he ends up making some of these crazy decisions that he does because of this kind of drive to survive. And I find it to be a really interesting story as he kind of goes through these various iterations of the European and Asian countryside as he's kind of moving across and experiencing and meeting people. It's just a fascinating film. If
you were at a dinner party with Sally, right, and he's telling you the story of his youth, and you didn't know him, and you never met him, you're just saying, "Hey, what's up?" Well, let me tell you a story. It would be wholly unbelievable, right? And so to your point about this sort of storytelling style, it's this sort of accidental exploration of the world, and it is something that I think is it's not unique to this sort of memoir film, but it is something that finds a safe harbor in these kinds of films, which is the sort of incidents of happenstance and accidents that lead us on this path. What is it that allows this to take root for us as a narrative when things that the film wears so heavily on its sleeves that are absolute, just crazy coincidences that keep propelling this thing forward? We get the sense that they're true because we know it's a memoir. I haven't read the book. But when things happen like, it's going to take an act of God for me to get out of this one, and then the building is blown up where the people are looking for his papers immediately as he walks out on the street, that's just incredible. And yet somehow this movie propels me too. I mean, I am fascinated by it, but I'm curious why this film and films like it have this sort of safe harbor in telling stories of accidental discovery and still being able to make them believable.
That's an interesting question. And I think a lot of it stems from, I feel like a lot of it stems from the youth of our protagonist. And to a certain extent, it can be, you can watch it and end up interpreting it as, through the eyes of youth, which I think, even in the real Solomon's kind of journey, it's entirely possible that there is some of that, 14 to 16-year-old mental recollection of how things were because of his age. But at the same time, it ends up playing in such a strange way that it feels authentic. And I think the reason for that, and I think this is what attracted Holland to the script, is when she first was presented with some of this material, which was before it was even published. Like, she was presented to it when it was still just in early stages and just a few chapters. And she found that Perel, he didn't embellish his stories. He didn't paint himself in a better light. And because of that, it ends up making this character somebody who you can kind of buy into, because it's not just always about how Sally escapes because of his smarts and whatever. Sometimes he's making incredibly selfish decisions because he just wants to live. Sometimes it's just, his 16-year-old lust making these decisions for him. And so I think a lot of it is that ends up making this story that much more believable.
It is funny. I think I like the sort of planting that in the sort of arm of youth, that it makes this story lighter than, in spite of some of the more grotesque things that go on in this movie, it makes the movie lighter than I think other movies in the kind of war genre, the telling the stories as frontline stories. There are certainly things that are hard to see in this movie, but I wouldn't call it a grotesque example or thing of the genre. I wouldn't call it something that's just outright hard to watch.
No.
Right.
Sure.
I think it's easier to watch because it's easier to absorb because it's seen through the eyes of, I think, an honest young protagonist. This guy who, as you say, he's just trying to make his way across the countryside, to find his family, to find his place, to deal with difficult things that he's seeing around him. But this isn't a horror war film by any stretch, right?
It's a coming of age story. Really.
It is. It's a coming of age story. It's the Graduate, but told in a very different context. Even the first, sort of the inciting incident when he jumps out of the tub is an act of youthful rebellion against the family, right? He ends up paying a dramatic sort of price, but you can tell, like, he is running on instinct when he hears rocks come through the door, and that sort of terror hits him, and he jumps out the window naked and hides in a barrel. And that is something that he ends up not thinking about, not playing out how that game's going or how that round's going to end, until he gets back in and sees his sister is dead. Like, that is I think the first act of awakening that I think demonstrates this is a coming of age story. He's a kid when this starts.
And what a way to re-enter that scene wearing the Nazi outfit that, one of the neighbors just found randomly for him, so that he had some clothes and could retreat home without running through the streets again naked. Yeah. And just seeing him come in a Nazi uniform only to see his sister dead there. I find it to be such an odd juxtaposition that is uncomfortable, but also I think that lends to exactly this point that we're making about how the story is being told and why a story like this makes sense. It's this coming of age story where this kid just doesn't, he is still very much in his world, right? And I think that's something that you get very much in stories about youth is, and I think he says it a few times where it's like, it's so much about his own reality, and this thing called war is just impeding on him because now he just can't do that thing that he wanted to do.
Right. That
sort of attitude that the youth have when their world is so much smaller and that hasn't opened up to a much bigger scale yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it is fascinating. The other thing that I think makes it I think leverages that perspective well, is the fact that every major incident, every major sort of community shift, I'm calling it in my head a community shift, because he goes from being this a Jewish boy in his family to moving through and becoming joining sort of the Russian Bolshevik school and camp, and then he gets picked up by the Nazis and becomes the most popular boy in the Nazi. It's like it's like he keeps changing communities, and he's the most popular kid in the class. All due respect to the guy who, the Polish nationalist boy who did not like him very much when he was in the Bolshevik school. Like he was always sort of at the center of his class by happenstance again. Like he was just lucky that he happened to turn himself in and plan his, to desert the Germans and turn himself back into the Russians with his gun in the air. Right as the Germans would come over and imagine that he has just taken 7 Russians hostage by himself when he was trying to desert to them. Like that is an act of happenstance that, again, just furthered his popularity and made him a candidate to go to this special school, and all of these things by accident, making him the most popular kid in school. He was just a boy trying to look out for himself, trying to kind of leverage that sense of that ideological worldview where he is just number one. And I think it plays so well in this movie, and surprisingly well in the landscape of the war at this time.
It very much makes sense when you look at scenes like, him winning the swimming contest,
right,
and gaining the affections of Lenny, played by Julie Delpy, which is great to see her in such a young role, and you get to see it in just a lot of those moments where it's just the excitement, or like when he gets to be in the pictures because he was the one who helped do the translations when they happened to capture Stalin's son, all these. Mm-hmm. Things that really happen by happenstance, but he's there. And I think it makes sense that Holland, she really kind of compared his character a bit to Woody Allen's Zelig, and how that was this character that always was in the right place at the right time. And because of that, helped boost kind of his own persona, which I find just so incredibly fascinating over the course of this film. And that much more powerful when you get to the end and he's in this situation where he is now about to be killed because he is, this gun the Russians give to this Polish prisoner, and they said, "Here, kill him or do what you want with him." And then his brother shows up, and just that, then all of a sudden that raw emotion that you read, the way that his brother reacts, that joy and everything is just all of a sudden it all kind of comes, and you realize there's been a big journey here, and it really affects a lot of people. And it just, I don't know, I just find it to be so authentic, the way that we kind of conclude in this way where he has kind of gone full circle, and now he's in this place where he welcomes his Jewishness, I guess you could say, and is back with his own tribe.
Yeah, his tribe, his family, his people. Even though his, most of his family had died, the fact that he was able to find his brother and sort of come home, and it really marks the end of this major sort of growing phase. You feel like he hears his brother calling his name, and that's the choke point of this movie, as the audience is hearing his brother and watching them hug, even as his hands are still tied behind his back. It's just a heart-wrenching sort of awakening that he's in such a sort of horrible place, and yet it's better than anywhere he's been since he left home. And I don't have a sense of how long he was away. What is the time? Do you know the time?
We know he said that when he went to when he was in Russia and he was in the orphanage, that he was there for 2 years.
Long enough to learn Russian.
Learn Russian and everything. Yeah, that's a good question, though. I'm going to see if I can figure that out while we keep talking.
Yeah, because that kept going through my mind, because obviously he doesn't age in the film terribly. I think he's not terribly. That came out wrong. But the young actor Marco Hofschneider is, you don't get a sense that they did a lot of work to age him in the movie, but he clearly was older. A lot happened to him, and he ingested a lot. I think just the act of kind of growing up and knowing that, he learned Russian in this camp and was able to learn it well enough to become an effective translator in the field for the Nazis was,
right.
That's significant.
It looks like he was 14 when he and his brother attempted to flee the Soviet-occupied part of Poland, and he ended up in the orphanage. He was there for a couple years and then ended up as the translator with the Nazis starting when he was 16. And then he was basically with them through the time until 1945. So another 4 years. So all told, it was a full 6 years that he was going through this process.
All right. So he's 20 at the end of this movie when he finds his brother again.
Yeah.
And his brother by that point looks about 60.
Yeah, right. He clearly has gone through quite a bit of stuff. And that was his real brother. That was Marco Hofschneider's real brother, which was great.
His brother Rene. That was very cool. And they end up, it ends up being a strangely, given the journey that we're on with Sally, it ends up being a rewarding experience watching them walk the fields at the end as they are taken by the Americans.
Yeah. And that much more powerful when we then cut to the real Solomon singing by a lake, when we see the real person in I suppose it was early 1990, late 1989, I think, when they were filming this, and actually seeing him, it just made it that much more poignant. And that was a beautiful moment also because we end up on this completely still, beautiful lake with the sun making it glow this beautiful golden color as we just kind of hold and find a moment of peace at the end.
Well, I find that lovely. And he's singing Psalm 133, "See now how good and how pleasant is the dwelling of brothers, moreover in unity." He's on the banks of this river in Israel. And I wanted to talk just a minute about what this shot does for him, for us, as sort of voyeurs of his life here, especially in context of the first shot of the film, which is a dream. We're underwater, and he is clearly in his Nazi youth uniform, and he's underwater. He's trying to, I gather, swim away. There's somebody trying to grab him. It is the first of our nightmares that he has, these dreams that he has. But the fact that the first shot starts in such a struggle, such a compressed kind of close quarters and suffocating experience underwater, and that the last shot becomes this beautiful, expansive, open, breathable, golden hour,
completely still
on top of the water. It feels like a lovely homage to the whole experience that he is, he's safe. He's safe now. He's climbed out.
Well, and think of how kind of trapped you are in water and how kind of exposed, because it's not our natural state. And so at the beginning, he just feels so trapped and confined because he's trapped underwater swimming in his a Nazi uniform. And then later, I mean, even in his bathtub, he's naked in the bath when those rocks get thrown through the window, and that forces him to jump out and run around. And then there's the swimming, which is, granted, it's a race, but still they're swimming in uniform, carrying weapons, and it's a very difficult race.
Swimming over the giant symbol of everything he's hiding from, this Nazis, the swastika painted on the bottom of the pool.
And then also he and his brother get separated as he's at the river, as he gets put on the boat and his brother doesn't. And then he falls in the water and gets rescued by a Russian. And it's a very beautiful theme, and just the theme of kind of water just being this kind of change agent, and this element that is so fluid in people's lives, and how it's so representative of who he has to be in order to kind of survive, the way that he has to basically be water to kind of flow through all these situations in a natural way.
Even more so that through as he learns to kind of be with water and be water, right? He learns the sort of experience of betrayal of it, right? And you already mentioned the separation of him and his brother as they deal with the initial escape on the boat. I can't get out of my head the betrayal of water in the barn when the actor that has sort of befriended him reaches into the water as he's bathing. He thinks he's in private, and he attempts to engage in some sort of sexual activity, and that because so much of this movie hinges on him not being discovered to be circumcised or to have been circumcised, he's had to hide his privates the entire time. This one moment that he is able to have this experience of freedom to kind of just let himself be who he is, it is ultimately the fact that he is so free in this water that leads to him being discovered as having been circumcised by a Nazi. As it turns out, it's not. They actually become very strange friends briefly, but he ends up staying safe. But it is still, to me, a real symbol of the fact that he's been betrayed by this thing that he's trying to understand, or, sort of metaphorically.
Well, betrayed, but at the same time, it ends up being an exposure agent, because it allows them both to basically revel in the truth.
Yeah,
right?
That's a good point.
It allows this German Nazi soldier who happens to be gay to be himself around right. Sully, who gets to be himself. And only when they're together do they now actually get to just be friends and be open. And what a relief it is, both of them just kind of enjoying the fact that they can be who they are.
Well, yeah, and the actor no longer, like after that experience, he no longer feels the need to in any way sort of push himself onto Sully to dominate as he was making the move to do, and they end up having a kind of a beautiful friendship.
It really is, yeah, and that I think is another nice element in the story that really fits in with kind of this whole Pilgrim's Progress journey sort of thing, where he meets people throughout and they become different parts of his life, helping kind of representing different elements and different growth agents, right? As that is a person that kind of teaches him not every Nazi is necessarily a bad one. To a certain extent, they're people. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I can see why there are elements within this film that gave a lot of German critics reason to call this, elements of anti-Semitism, and be very frustrated with the way things were depicted. But in all honesty, I think it also depicts it as just very human when you stop seeing these people as just very specifically who they are and just as the roles that they're playing, and more just specifically as the people they are. Like another example is the young Russian kid later in the film when, they're battling, he's with the young Nazis and they're battling the Russians, and the Russians are storming them, and he's looking out the window. He is afraid to shoot, and he sees a young Russian coming up, and this young kid stands up and Sully kind of looks at him, and they acknowledge each other like they're both young kids fighting this war for these other people, and they're like, why am I even here? Until one of Sully's superiors kills him. But still, you get this sense that there's an exploration in this film of the humanness mm-hmm. of what's going on that gets so lost by the wayside when it focuses so much on just the brutalities of war.
There's this other angle that I want to make sure we talk about, which is that I think more horrifying than some of the things we already expect from a war movie, that I think this movie does exceptionally well. And I don't remember the last time I've seen a movie like this, that a true story that really sort of focused on this angle of the manipulation of children, an entire generation of children indoctrinated into this like bananas belief system that we see on display, for example, in this classroom of this very prestigious school, as this older gentleman teacher is attempting to measure the facial features of Sally to prove that he is an Aryan and deserves to be in that classroom. And he ends up saying, no, you're not a pure sort of ethnic German, but you're Aryan, and so you deserve to be here. I can tell by measuring the features, the size of your head, the length of the tip of your nose to your forehead and your lips, that you're not a Jew. And at least we've nailed that. We're okay. No Jews here. It is absurd. And you see that writ large in this movie. Every time you engage with a child in the youth movement here, you get a sense of just how important the infrastructure was to indoctrinate children, to make them feel like they are part of this giant machine and make them grow into their role in this in the experience. I mean, did that hit home for you at all?
It did, and I think that it's definitely a good one to bring up, because I think that it does a good job also of exploring how easy it can be for people to manipulate these young kids into kind of buying into this whole belief system. I mean, it's like a prep school. You know, they're doing swimming competitions, they're doing just regular old classes, but they also happen to be going through this, anti-Semitic training and very Nazi oriented. But still, it's just school. And with these young minds, you can see how easy they are to manipulate, because you're a teacher, you know better, because kids believe adults know what's right, and they just do what you tell them. I think another really interesting example is Julie Delpy's character, who I find to be really interesting about how she approaches everything. She's a young girl who falls for these boys, falls for Sully, and really believes that the Jews are terrible. They're the ones who, and this is what's interesting, they're the ones responsible for her father's death, right? And that, I think, is another way that these kids were spun into these belief systems because of the war and the fact that my dad died in that war. Therefore, the enemy is that much more bad because they're the ones who killed him and took him away from me. And I find it to be such a contrast that I found really almost profound with the story when he ends up confessing to Lenny's mother, who is the one who understands what he's going through and feels for him, and is at the same time completely heartbroken, knowing that her daughter will never be able to do that exact same thing that she just did and accept him for who he is. And she's the one who's getting pregnant because she wants to donate her child to the cause. I mean, it's such a fascinating comparison between mother and daughter right there.
Well, especially when mother comes out as she's holding him in her arms, right? She's holding his head and says, "Don't ever tell Lenny what you just told me." She's just, kids today are different. This generation is different. I mean, she just cops to it. That to your point, there, this movie does such a good job of demonstrating earlier on that there are other kinds of Germans, and here we realize that that was where the separation took place, right? Mother and child. That was the generation that was written into the Nazi Party. And then there was the activist on the train who ended up having a little bit of a, speaking of The Graduate, a little bit of a Mrs. Robinson moment right there on the train, and gave an entirely new meaning to the words "Mein Führer."
Yes, she did. So enraptured by this boy and his youth and
his courage.
Honestly, a little disturbing that this middle-aged woman is laying it down with this 16-year-old boy. But I mean, is so taken with everything going on that she doesn't even realize that he's circumcised.
Yeah. I thought that was it was dark and the train was moving.
Yeah.
And how are you You're not paying attention to details.
No, apparently not.
No.
Apparently not. Very interesting to kind of look at all these different things. And that goes to the sense of this journey and how every character is this different aspect of life for him to experience.
You've seen other Agnieszka Holland movies, have
Yes.
you? Okay. What do we need to know about her as a filmmaker?
I think that she hasn't done a lot of Holocaust films. I think she's done two or three Holocaust films.
Are we doing any more of them in our series?
We are. Our next one is In Darkness is the next one we're going to be talking about, and that's one of her others. We are skipping that the other one for something non-Holocaust related. She actually has said over the course of making the films that she did that deal with the Holocaust, that she felt pretty like she ended up spending like 7+ years of her life just doing all the work to actually make the films. And she's like, I have spent more time focusing on stories of the Holocaust than the Holocaust itself actually lasted. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of done. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think that probably, that's fair. That's very fair.
In terms of her approach to the work, should we hold off on a conversation about what she brings to the thing to the picture as a filmmaker after we've seen more of her films in a row? I am ill-equipped to have that conversation, but I am really curious what you observe in her style.
Yeah, I definitely want to explore these other films before we really get into it. But I know that she has never shied away from politics, and both in her films and just in life in Poland. She's very much one of those people who is engaged in the political scene. I think that she is a person who. Actually, she doesn't even live there anymore. I think she ended up moving to France at some point.
Right.
But I think that the way that she tells her stories is very intelligent, very artful. I think that she recognizes the type of stories that she's telling. And I'm thinking to specifically the ones that I've seen from her from the 90s, which is largely all I've seen. But I feel like when you see the way that she approaches this, and she even said, she doesn't want to make it purely tragic. She wants to allow it to be a little playful. And what I love about the way that she adapted the memoirs in the case of this is that she really did revel in that playful element, whether it's having Sully do the little, as he's practicing his salute, he starts dancing, which was improv, but she recognized it like, this is a great thing. We have to have that little dance because it totally reflects your youth. But also a moment that I just found to be just brilliant screenwriting. It's when he's on the boat and he's calling for his brother. He's separated. They're passing another boat. There's a lot of confusion as to what's going on. The narration kicks in because we haven't even talked about the fact that it's a biopic. And so, there's a lot of narration. As the narration is happening, the narration gets interrupted as the character gets bumped off the boat and falls into the water. I was like, that was a genius way to kind of just tie all this, the narration past and present together.
Well,
so she's allowing herself to fun. The dreams.
The dreams
wow.
too. I mean, how could you talk about sort of frivolity in filmmaking and not talk about Hitler and Stalin ballroom dancing?
Right.
It's just lovely.
Yep. It was a fantastic little bit.
It is. And what a wonderful way to demonstrate the fall of the Stalin-Hitler pact early in the war. And that, as you watch Stalin's brain break open, this giant facade of his head break open and candies falling from the dear leader's ceiling in this hall. I mean, it's just and I believe were they in a church? During this, was that a church or was that just a gathering hall? Because it felt like this was on the heels of a major discussion in the film of atheism, right? And it was challenging, religious belief.
Right. Yeah, because it was when he was in the Soviet Union.
Yes.
And he was at the orphanage. So to me, it looked like the orphanage meeting hall / prayer hall.
Yeah, right.
sort of room.
I thought it was an interesting location to have this this breakup of the Stalin-Hitler pact and candies falling from clearly a vent in the ceiling, thanks to dear leader, not to God. Like it is all of the things that we're talking about here, right? Her political activism, her ideological worldview, they're all coming to play in this one sequence, and Stalin and Hitler are ballroom dancing, and I thought it was just brilliant.
And it represents the confusion swirling around in his head.
Truly.
Brilliantly. Yeah.
Truly. His youth, that craziness. And weirdly, it was a kind of a spot of joy in the middle of the film that is just, in a film when he's going through some incredibly difficult things, to give us a break to laugh a little bit, I think was well done.
And I think that speaks so well again to the way that Holland constructed the script. Yeah. I just think it's such a smart script, the way that she allowed that 14 to 19-year-old youth to come through in this journey. And I don't know, I can't get over how smooth it all is. It just flows really beautifully through from beginning to end.
So the film was shot in English and German simultaneously, and all I could read into that was for Julie Delpy, who didn't speak German.
Well, I think there were a lot of different people speaking a lot of different languages.
There were a lot of languages.
Because, there's clearly a lot of dubbing. Every time Marco Hofschneider is speaking Russian, it's clearly dubbed. Mm-hmm. I think that it's just throughout, they were just getting people to either try to speak it and then dub them, or just speaking their native languages. And honestly, I feel like a lot of that could still be just the way that things were done at the time. We've looked at some other German films, Italian films of the era, and they were still in a place where they weren't recording the live sound on set, or if they were, they would still have people speaking their own languages and dub it later. So right. I guess I'm not surprised that is the way that this film was constructed.
Some parts dubbed better than others.
Certainly,
but overall, I didn't find it terribly jarring, and the restoration, I will call it a restoration. Obviously, I haven't seen the original, but I signed up for the Criterion Channel, Andy.
Hey, look at you!
Yeah, I'm in it. This was my A number one film down.
Nice,
and
it's a good way to start.
It was a great way to start. It was just a lovely rendition of it.
I saw, well, I guess the disc that I got from Netflix was the DVD. I know that they have subsequently released it on Blu-ray, but still, it was completely taken care of, very clean print. It looked really nice.
Cinematography, Jacek Petrichki.
Sounds good to me.
Jacek Petrichki.
It's going to be tricky names for us.
This is going to be tough. Yeah. It's going to be a very difficult series. I'm a real polygoof. The camera, I thought was it was an able camera. I found myself truly absorbed, like saying out loud, "This is going to be a great experience." In the first opening sequence after the dream, it takes us straight to a circumcision. A bris, right? And everybody's gathering, but we're watching. The kids are all watching through interior windows, like interior doors that are slightly, dirtied. And the reverse shots are all looking back at the kids through these glass panes. And it is so deeply interesting, the way these shots move, that it took me a while to realize. I think they were already like it was the moment the moil, is it the moil? That's what it's called. The person who reaches down, is that what it's called? I am
sure
deeply out of my depth here, but reaches down and grabs the baby penis and starts the process. And that's when I realized that I'm in the middle of something I didn't expect. It was already too late. I was just enraptured by the way he moves the camera around, and they use the camera on these tight interior spaces. I thought it was just lovely.
There was a lot of movement. It always felt alive, never in a way that felt confusing, never in a way that, that made it obvious. And I don't have a problem with an obvious camera. I certainly love it when it's used in a really fun way. But I felt like in the context of the way that this story unfolded, it felt youthful. And I think that worked really well for this young character as he traipsed around the European countryside.
Some really interesting perspectives too. The way he uses that crane at the death of our actor friend, right? Where we have
that God's eye
Sally,
view where he goes straight up,
goes straight up and is revealing all of the death in the trenches, and what has gone on in this sequence, right? That we've just sort of borne witness to, and what we are still most concerned with is that sense of humanity in that little offshoot, but it gives us that sort of reveal of the shape of the earth so slowly. And I found it just incredibly touching and powerful way to use the camera. It was great. I don't believe I've seen anything else he's done.
I haven't either. Looking through his work, I just haven't caught anything else from him, but I don't know how much he's worked outside of this with Agnieszka. I don't think a lot. So, but who knows? I don't know, but I think that in context of this story, they worked very well together.
Zbigniew Preissner,
yes,
is behind the music of this film. How did it hit you?
It's beautiful. I mean, I think that the themes just fit really well in context of this story as well. He's a composer that I am more familiar with. He has worked with Holland on a number of other projects like The Secret Garden. He worked on the Three Colors trilogy, so I'm familiar with his work there. I think that, let's see, I'm trying to think what else he's done. Stuff like
Double Life of Veronique.
Double Life of Veronique, Fairy Tale, A True Love or a True Story. He's a person who has written some very well-known themes, I think, and just somebody whose music I find to be very emotional, and so I really enjoy it.
I do too. There is this theme that hits, right? This long note that just sort of comes in a number of times when we're watching in these moments of transformation. Right after Sally experiences something, it just sort of this resonant tone that hits that I find really jarring, and it's just sort of it marks an emotional timestamp for me that I thought was used very, very effectively. So, looking forward to hearing more from Zbigniew Preissner.
Yeah, a lot of the stuff that he's done was with Krzysztof Kieslowski. They did a lot of work together. And he's one of those composers who has written a lot of his own stuff outside of film, and those pieces have gone on to make their way into films, like Tree of Life, Terrence Malick's movie.
Sure. He
pulled one of his requiems in for some of the music there. So,
how'd it do at award season?
It wasn't a huge film, awards-wise, which... I don't know if it was just the time or what, but it still did well enough for itself. It had 8 wins, 8 other nominations. Over at the Oscars, it did get nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay. However, Holland lost to The Silence of the Lambs, Ted Talley, in his adaptation of that. In context, boy, do I love Silence of the Lambs. And honestly, from the book to the script, I think that was a master in adaptation, or just a masterclass, the way that he adapted it. Really strong adaptation. So I kind of have a hard time with that. What's interesting is that this screenplay was written before the book, the memoirs were finished.
Right.
So in a weird way, it's almost, I don't know which came first.
The book is a novelization.
Yeah, right. It's very funny. Another interesting tidbit about the Oscars, it was fully expected that Germany would put this in as their submission for nomination for Best Foreign Language Film. For some reason, they didn't. I don't know why they didn't submit it that year.
Well, I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier, right? They did not like this film in Germany. This was not a popular film in Germany.
Yeah, which is strange, because they submitted nothing.
Yeah.
It was like a year they just didn't submit. And so I think that's almost more offensive.
Telling. Yeah.
Yeah. So over at the Golden Globes, however, it did win Best Foreign Language Film. And at the BAFTAs, it was nominated for Best Film, not in the English language, but lost to Raise the Red Lantern. Boy, we like that one.
Yeah, we do like that.
That's a pretty tough battle right there. So, all in all, I think it had a decent amount of love in the award circles. And, could have done a little better, but still, I think that they're probably pretty happy with where it was.
And how did it do at the box office?
boy, this is going to be an interesting series. I have no idea what to expect when trying to find financial information for Holland's films. But I tell you, if it's anything like this one, it's not going to be easy. I couldn't find anything as far as the budget for this film, except for the fact Holland said it was low. That's all I have. The film premiered in France November 14th, 1990. Then it played at the Human Rights Watch Film Festival, May 1991. It opened in New York, June 28th, 1991, opposite The Naked Gun, 2.5, The Smell of Fear.
Well, I love that.
What a combo, though, I tell you. It did expand into limited art house releases around the country and ended up grossing $5.5 million domestically. I couldn't find any information as to how it did the rest of the world, so unfortunately that is all we have on this one. Hopefully its awards buzz did help it find its audience.
Well, Andy, it's a fascinating film to start this series with. I having never seen it. It was a real treat to watch today, and I'm very much looking forward to the rest of the films of Holland. So I am ready as ever to hit the mat and see how it does over at Flickchart.
Let's do it.
Head over to flickchart.com/thenextreel and you'll see all the films we've talked about on this show. If you swipe over in your show notes and tap the word Flickchart, it will take you straight over to this film and where you can add it to your own list and see how it stands up against ours.
First up, Europa Europa versus Autumn Sonata.
Europa Europa, please.
I will take Europa Europa. Europa Europa, man, Do the Right Thing.
Oh, well, that's a horrible pairing.
I will say Europa Europa because of the way that this film has stuck with me for the last 30 years. Like, it has not left me. So I feel like that, and I'm not saying Do the Right Thing hasn't stuck with me, but it's different in different ways. I feel a little more connected to Europa Europa because of that. I'm fine going either way.
Well, I think I'm going to go Spike on this one. And I think I know that it is because I feel disconnected. I think when I watch these World War II movies, especially when I watch movies like this now or Das Boot, where I'm watching about, and I'll say in heavy air quotes, the other side, right? Knowing that it's a complex situation and generally we want to fight Nazis. And yet this is a story of people that you grow an affinity to in these films just because of our perspective being sort of in their heads. It's hard to sort of watch these movies and come out of it realizing, I really like that Nazi. He was a real sympathetic Nazi there. So I'm going to say Do the Right Thing because that is a movie that I have a still, even as an outsider to that film, I still feel a greater connection to it. I think Spike does an exceptional job of making me feel like I have a great connection to it. That's my case.
They're both powerful films. You sold me.
Oh, all right.
Do the Right Thing.
All right.
But boy, I'd be happy either way.
Me too. I'm just
solid films.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Europa Europa or Interstellar.
Oh, Andy. What are we going to do here?
I'm going to say Europa Europa.
I think I am too. That's crazy to me.
Well,
all right.
It's a good movie. Europa Europa or The Untouchables.
Europa Europa.
Europa Europa. Yeah. Europa Europa or Trading Places.
Europa Europa.
Definitely Europa Europa. Europa Europa or All of Me.
Europa Europa.
Europa Europa. Europa Europa or, here it is, Raise the Red Lantern. You can't have it at the Oscars. You get it here.
No.
Which way are we going to go?
I'm going to go Raise the Red Lantern on this one.
Boy. They're both very affecting films. I will say Raise the Red Lantern as well.
All right.
But Criterion, get your act together. Get Zhang Yimou into your lineup. Really.
Whole, like all of them. Seriously?
Just
enough already.
Come on.
All right.
Europa Europa or Rififi. Oh, I'm going to say Europa Europa.
Europa, yeah.
These are tough calls.
Diabolical.
Raise the Red Lantern. Yeah. That leaves it at 117 on our chart. 117 out of 448 puts it at a 74%.
Well,
lower for me than I'd like, but
yeah, that's a little low for me. And my own performance wasn't as great as I expected. It hit some hard places. How did it do for you?
Yeah, same thing. I was really upset with some of my choices I had to make. It was very difficult. I ended up at 947 out of 4315, which is a 78%, much lower than I feel it deserves.
Especially after the conversation we just had, I am stunned to hear that mine exceeds yours. It came out at 186 out of 1445, and that's an 87%.
Yeah.
And notwithstanding challenging rankings, I mean, it was not easy this time around, but still, that should be, if I go by the algorithm, Flickchart is recommending that I should rate this as a 4.5 star film over at letterboxd.com/thenextreel. And Andy, I gotta say, I didn't feel any stars fall when I watched this movie. Could be the curse of recency, but it feels like a 5-star film to me.
This really is a 5-star film for me. I mean, again, as I don't feel like, I've probably said it enough, but it's a film that I saw 30 years ago, and it has resonated with me ever since. I have images from it that have stuck in my head all that time and likely will continue to do so. The way that Holland crafted the story, I just find such a masterclass in building this type of Pilgrim's Progress story. Is just beautiful the way it unfolds and the way that we follow his journey. So it's absolutely a 5-star film for me.
It is absolutely a 5-star film for me too. I think I've accepted the truth, the one and only truth. This was a great movie, and I'm eager to show it to others, frankly, which is mark of a great mark of a difficult film. So,
and certainly, I mean, as I said, I haven't explored really any films of Holland's outside of her films in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very much looking forward to exploring our next 2 films, which are much more recent. And then outside of that, just looking at more of the stuff that she's done, because I feel like she is a filmmaker definitely worth looking at.
So where do we go from here? You said it's already it is another war film, Holocaust film.
It is her film from 2011 called In Darkness. It is the story of a Polish sewage worker who aids a group of Jewish refugees by hiding them in the sewers.
Outstanding. That sounds like a real upper. All right.
It's gonna be. It's gonna be.
When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
Amazon giveth, Andy.
As Amazon always doeth.
Oh, did it? I don't know.
Well, there's definitely people who hate it.
That's true.
It's not just, region issues, although we do have some of those.
We do. Sometimes it's hard to read these when you get them and the world's already falling apart around us. We can't go outside, and then you read one of these things, and it makes me want to punch my computer. But okay, this is the bit we do. Let's go ahead and do it. You want to go first? You want me to go
sure,
first?
I'll kick it off.
All right, do it.
I'll go first. I've got a 1-star by 1776, who says, I tossed my copy in the garbage. Bad acting. This is a real stinker. Get Casablanca with Humphrey Bogart, or Schindler's List, or Saving Private Ryan if you want a World War II movie. My wife and I both thought it was a real stinker. I purchased the movie. Halfway through it, we took it out of the DVD player and tossed it in the garbage. The acting is the worst.
That's what I hear, though. I hear that if you really want a great list of World War II movies like this one, you're going to go for Schindler's List or Casablanca.
There's a real World War II movie.
That's a double feature, I think Randy would say. Well, I got one by me that's titled No. And here we go.
All right.
Seriously, you cannot watch this movie. Yes, the message of courage is great and the idea behind the story is good, but it's not realistic. And there are many unnecessary parts in it. The nude parts, had nothing to do with the movie's plot. It looked just like he was saying, hey, look at my body. Isn't it great? Yes, the story's important, but it just seemed as if this kid lived his life completely off of luck. And that's not realistic. I watched this movie in history class, and I hope to never see it again. The movie would have been good if some of those parts were excluded. Instead of enjoying the movie, I would turn my head every time a bath would come up, and there are plenty of those. Don't get me wrong, the story was good, but some things are definitely dramatized and made up. My class just kept saying, wow, he's lucky, or that was lucky, or whoa, how did he get through that? It was not a good movie. I do not recommend it for anyone. Horrible.
Oof.
Tough review about a movie whose central object is a penis. Am I right? We got to get through the penis parts. That's part of the plot. It's
that
a
is
plot.
Pretty heavy. It starts off with the circumcision, as you pointed out.
Exactly. It's a plot penis. You cannot have if there's no penis, there's no movie. No penis, no movie.
So true. They should have put that on the movie poster.
No penis, no movie. Thanks, Amazon.
It's hard to believe we have been having in-depth weekly conversations about movies since 2011.
Oh, you're telling me. Producing this show week after week is so much fun, but it does require a ton of work behind the scenes. If you'd like to help support our efforts, one easy way is by using our Originals page when shopping for books and movies that we've covered.
Your purchases made through our links give us a small commission at no extra cost to you and allow us to keep having these great discussions.
We are highlighting adaptations from Season 9 over at our Originals page, thenextreel.com/originals. That's the site where listeners can purchase the source material for all of our adapted film discussions.
We had a big Robin Hood series this season, looking at 9 different versions on screen. Many were likely adapted from Howard Pyle's The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood, including Douglas Fairbanks in Robin Hood, The Adventures of Robin Hood, Disney's Robin Hood Prince of Thieves, and the 1991 Robin Hood, and Ridley Scott's Robin Hood.
Robin and Marian was specifically based on the ballad The Jest of Robin Hood.
And we really don't have too much to say about Robin and the Seven Hoods.
We talked Dead Ringers for our David Cronenberg series adapted from Barry Wood and Jack Geislin's novel Twins.
Have you checked out that show?
You know, I haven't, but I've heard great things.
2 comedies from our Steve Martin series were adaptations, Pennies from Heaven from the BBC series, and The Lonely Guy from the book by Bruce J. Friedman.
The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas was part of our Colin Higgins series, adapted from the Broadway musical.
Spike Lee brought us Black Klansman from Ron Stallworth's memoir.
And we looked at a trio of John le Carré adaptations, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, The Little Drummer Girl, and Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy.
Plus, all 3 movies in our Agnieszka Holland series were based on books, Europa Europa, In Darkness, and Spore.
La Cage aux Folles and its remake The Birdcage both came from Jean Poiret's original play.
We also talked about Arsenic and Old Lace and Charade in our Cary Grant series.
All of these were based on other material, and it is all available on our Originals page, thenextreel.com/originals. Every book purchased supports the podcast.
Get the full list of adaptations we've covered and start your next read today at thenextreel.com/originals.